One of the features of this crisis has been that despite being an international pandemic, every country has handled it very differently. There are tremendous differences locally, and even within countries, there are often differences. Here in the United States, each state has had a different lockdown period, for example. In the UK, in Scotland, the Scottish National Party set up clinics immediately in storefronts all over the place. This is, well, a feature of the modern world. And it's very important because as we go more and more global, the systems that are global don't necessarily function as they might might want them to, and everything is still done on a national level. But the whole crisis itself begs the question, what is a nation? What is the purpose of it? And indeed, is there really any advantage in being a large nation? The answer is there may not be. Many things are done locally, broken up by a system that we might call devolved or federal. And one of my favorite examples of that is Canada. Now, Canada hasn't used the $1 bill for a very long time. They've switched over to the $1 coin, which has a loon on it, so it's called the loonie, which has been very effective as a currency and also bringing good luck in the 2002 Olympic hockey for double gold. Another story. But back when this bill was printed in the 1980s, they were still getting Canada together, as it were. And it was difficult. You have the francophones and the anglophones, and a lot of special rights were demanded by Quebec. And as they were working things out at a place called Meech Lake, an agreement was reached. And afterwards, with all these special rights for Quebec, the first Canadians stood up and said, "What about us?" Well, it became obvious that all Canadians needed their own special considerations, and so they have a very federal structure. Things in Canada are decided very much on a provincial level. For example, their much vaunted healthcare system, which is the pride of Canada and many people in the United States as well, is administered almost entirely on a provincial level. And the provinces are much smaller than American states. There's a very good reason for this, not just the federalism that makes Canada what it is. Okay? It is very, very true that as we evolve more and more towards systems that are delivering personal benefits, especially something like healthcare, it has to be done on a personal level. We might like to think that there are always economies of scale, that things get better as they get bigger. But do they really? I mean, this is an industrial mindset, and this is an imperial mindset. I mean, honestly, if there is free trade around the world, free exchange of people, and there's no war going on, what is the advantage of being a big nation? In fact, there are terrible disadvantages when you have built up bureaucracy. And this isn't just a feature of government, this is a feature of a world based on technology itself. A smaller company is going to be more nimble and active and able to respond quickly. If you have something like Tesla, they are going to quickly develop whole new technologies that change the way we look at electric cars. Whereas, say, General Motors, well, they developed the Bolt, which was nice, but they couldn't figure out how to push it through the existing dealer network, and it's dying a slow death. Unlike the EV1, which died a quick death. More like the Fiero, which died a slow death. I don't mean to sound bitter, I mean to imply that I'm bitter very, very strongly. We can talk more about corporations and how technology changes the need for big and how diseconomies of scale work, but it's becoming more and more apparent in nations. And Canada, which had the luxury of setting itself up fairly recently, back when this bill was produced, well, they've done a pretty good job. Now, that's not to say that there aren't problems with this. For example, most of Canada's oil comes from Alberta. If you look at the network of pipelines that they have, it pretty much stops at the provincial borders. All of the other provinces, like British Columbia and Saskatchewan next door, have been able to veto any pipeline project that brings that oil to where it's needed in Ontario. So they do it all by rail car. Now, you may have your opinions about pipelines, but delivering oil by rail car is an environmental disaster. There is so much more that leaks in the process of filling and emptying and moving the trains around, and it's really dangerous. Just ask the people of Lac-Mégantic, Quebec, where a train blew up. So, what do they? How do they handle it all? I mean, if you look at the pipelines, they're all over Alberta, and then most of the oil goes into the United States. It's actually easier to cross an international border than a provincial border. Okay? So that's one of the downsides of a highly devolved or federal structure is that infrastructure becomes difficult. But when you're talking about something like delivering healthcare, something that Canada very much excels at, this is where the action is. And we see it in other countries too. Germany, for example, has devolved a lot of power federally into the lands, or the states of Germany. It's a very common situation. Now, it doesn't mean that countries necessarily have it set up, but many should. I mentioned the UK briefly, how Scotland has devolved, so has Wales, so has Northern Ireland, to the extent the Parliament functions there. But England has not. And this may have a lot to do with the whole Brexit situation. If you look at how the vote went, it was really England that voted in favor of Brexit, in favor of leaving the European Union and withdrawing from a more national thing to something a little closer. Why did they do that? Well, one very good reason is that England does not have its own parliament. England does not have control over its own destiny. Power has not been devolved there. And it's frustrating. People are just angry and upset because things aren't working as well as they should. People in Scotland tend to be very happy with the Scottish National Party and vote for it because it's doing a good job. In England, nothing but frustration, and it gets expressed in weird ways. See, a lot of the complaints about the global world come down to something that is more local. And devolution, to realize the quality of services at the local level, is often the best way to go. And this is something, well, the United States was built on originally, but we've been gradually evolving power back up. What we have seen in this crisis is that power comes back down. There's only so much the federal government can do. And indeed, the international institutions like the World Health Organization have been largely irrelevant. Things happen at a local level, especially when you're talking about something like healthcare or service-based. When you look at having a market-based economy, the information is at the local level where the market is. Yes, we can aggregate big data and bring it up to a central system, but how much do you really learn? How much do you really know? Again, an economy is all about people, not just their skills, but their attitudes, right? Everything. The more decisions can be made at a local level, the better those decisions are, because the power of a market comes in its ability to deliver information, but that information really only goes so far. The more things are based on quick turnaround and decision making, or based on service providing and all that, the more there are diseconomies of scale. And that's why we're going to see a lot more federalism and devolution all around the world, as we have seen through this crisis. Canada is functioning quite well through all of this. They are more of a startup, I guess, a more nimble economy. Britain could probably have avoided the whole Brexit disaster if they simply had an English parliament, which sounds really strange. But dissatisfaction with the ability of government to deliver what it needs to bubbles over in a very strange way. Okay? Dissatisfaction is often taken out at the top, even if the problems, or for that matter, the solutions, are best found at the bottom. What we've seen through this crisis is that things work well at the most local level. Now that causes a tremendous variation from one place to the next, and it can be difficult to deal with. But in terms of being personal and having the right information at the right time, nothing beats the local level. It's hard to develop infrastructure that way, but that's going to be the give and take of the coming world. And we're going to see more and more devolution all the time. There simply is not an advantage in being a big empire any longer. The days of great big things like Austria-Hungary or Spanish Empire or Ottoman Empire, they're long gone. There's just no need for it. But what do we do about it, especially when you have an existing country? And it is indeed the nation state, the Westphalian nation state, is the basis of the entire planet. If it's already too big, what can it do? It can devolve power. It can empower people at the local level to make the decisions that benefit local populations. It's going to become more and more popular with time. I think Canada has a really good example, and it's worth looking into more.